Hello there and welcome to another live chapter reading for Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Today I shall be reading from Night Fire Chain Reaction Book 2 by C.L. Schneider. Chapter 1. Murky black tendrils of pain slithered up my ankle. They wrapped around my legs, anxious and cold and begging to be felt. The ghost they spawned from was an old one. Shed in the last moments before death, the tattered remnants of human trauma had been drifting here for years. It was forever a part of this place now, forgotten and abandoned like the building it was trapped in. Regret, I thought, processing the emotion's distinctive touch. It was sad, but it wasn't the trauma I was looking for. I shook my leg, dislodging the shadow, and moved on. My quick dismissal wasn't as callous as it appeared. As an empath, I understood. No matter the species, the age, or the cause, every hurt was significant to the soul that owned it. This one wasn't significant enough, not tonight, not for what I needed. Shivering, I yanked the zipper up on my hoodie. It was late, the building was drafty, but my sudden chill wasn't sparked by cold. If it was, exchanging my human skin for scales was far more efficient. Being a half-dragon shapeshifter had its perks. Generating heat was one of them, but it was the end of August, and there was plenty of heat to go around. It was disgust that had me trembling. I shouldn't be here, I shouldn't be doing this, and I'm terrible, I thought. At least I would be if I continued on my current slippery slope. It was figurative decline. The crumbling concrete floor of the derelict apartment building I was trespassing in was as flat and unwavering as it should be. My morals, however, were careening steadily downward. If Shifter Hell was a place, it was a sure bet I had a standing reservation carved in stone. Of course, the name Dahlia Nite had been on that list for a while now. A former executioner for the Dragon Queen Nalish. There was no way my elevator had ever been going up. Not even the last 97 years I'd spent performing mostly good deeds in a human role could change my eternal damnation. But this? Trolling the slums, looking to loot the trauma from whatever poor souls I could find and use it for target practice, this was going to plummet me straight to the bottom. But I had to do something. My empathic abilities had been a mystery from day one. Over the years they'd grown to become an important part of my life. The clues my empathic glimpses provided were mostly reliable, even if the results were inconsistent. Since moving back to Sentinel City 3 months ago, that inconsistency had flown off the freaking chart. I tried not using my empathy, but I didn't like being limited. I solved crimes and hunted monsters for a living. I needed every edge I could get. Unfortunately, this edge had become too unpredictable to be trusted. Hurting an enemy with an involuntary psychic attack was one thing. Sending an innocent man into cardiac arrest was a near-fatal mistake. I wanted it to be my last. If absorbing and reassigning pain was something I could do now, I needed to get a handle on it. Yet the last 4 weeks I'd been dragging my feet, because there was only one way to train my sixth sense. I needed pain. I needed to feel it and play with it, and doing so for the sake of my own gain made me feel no better than the creatures I hunted. Yet the last 4 weeks, ignoring the issue though, was dangerous, which was why I was spending my Monday night touring one of the city's most notorious buildings in the old waterfront district. The Fletcher had been condemned for years. Rumours of spirits and ghouls fed into the city's love of legends, but the only activity in the ramshackle structure was the unseemly kind. There was no electricity. Most of the rooms were missing doors. Grime coated the few remaining broken window panes. Termites and humans had riddled the interior with walls and holes. Fire had scorched the rest. Graffiti bubbles coloured nearly every surface. A few surviving furnitures were coated in layers of filth. Just looking at them warranted a shower. The kids who snuck into party mostly stuck to the lower levels. The junkies who stumbled in to forget their lives for a few hours or days favoured the solitude of the higher floors. Runaways and vagrants, however, made use of the entire 6 stories. Most would crash for a while, then get smart and move on. Some graduated into permanent residency. Now and then the city came in and cleaned the place out, rounding up the runways, busting the dealers and the junkies. They came right back. Curling up in dark corners and old closets hiding from the world, shooting up and fading away. Their decaying souls shed trauma like autumn leaves in a perpetual windstorm. There were certain places empaths preferred to avoid. Hospitals, nursing homes, cemeteries, prisons, the sites of ancient battles, all made the top 10. I wasn't sure where drug den fell on the list, but I couldn't walk 5 feet without someone suffering reaching out to me. It was everywhere, darkening the fissured concrete, drifting over the decomposing garbage and mould-infested blankets, clinging to the hunched human forms that had moved past unfortunate to wretched a damn long time ago. What I saw and felt wasn't your typical ghost, but I'd found no other word to describe the residue that haunted a soul. It grew with each new trauma, polluting humanity's insides. Eventually, it manifested into a shadowy form that clung to their bodies, tainting, suffocating, slowing off bits of trauma with each step. Sometimes after death, their ghost stayed behind. Here, so many had stayed, not even a spotlight could have penetrated the layers. Trying to be inconspicuous as I roamed, I used my heightened vision more than my flashlight. My long red curls were pulled into an unassuming ponytail, my beer-stained t-shirt, ripped jeans and boots scuffed by the eagle-like claws of a pissed-off Garuda wasn't exactly camouflage, but dressing down had prevented most lingering stares. Still with the excess trauma spiking my pulse and flushing my skin, I looked too healthy to blend. Many had sores or track marks on their pallid skin. Unfocused eyes, rimmed with red, had sunk deep into their skulls. I stepped over a semi-conscious group of men and women, sprawled out on torn cushions in the hall, and struggled not to gag. Their malnourished bodies smelled of piss and misery, with a dash of alcohol and stale sweat thrown in for good measure. Far more acute was their trauma. I can't take it, I thought. I can ease their pain, even if only for a moment, as long as I don't kill their bodies in the process. Animated voices filtered out from a room down the hall. Wanting to avoid anyone aware enough to be a problem, I turned the corner. In the next hall was a room with a single body lying under the window. I ducked inside. The man curled upon the mattress had a pulse, but his breathing was erratic. He tried to hold his bloodshot eyes open long enough to see me, but after a few long blinks he surrendered to the will of the empty syringe beside him. Circumventing a pool of dried vomit on the floor, I kicked the syringe aside and crouched next to the mattress. His trauma reacted to my proximity and slid out, darting up like a serpent ready to strike. It flowed back down to lazily encircle his neck. Black poured over his shoulders and arms, and it squeezed as it travelled. Always crushing, always weighing down, and pressing in, always haunting. Interrupting its exodus, I thrust my hands into the black. It coiled happily around my fingers and up my arms. Using my crimson plates as a barrier against its cold touch, I let the scales out on both limbs and dropped my internal guard. Bitter loneliness swept in. Waves of shame, regret and loss crashed into me, stealing my breath. The man had no one, nothing, and hadn't for a very long time. Moving on from welcoming his ghosts, drawing them off, shadows streamed steadily out from his soul to close in around me. If the man was dead, I'd be catching a glimpse of his last moments. Instead, the pain of his entire life was struggling to make itself known. Moving on from with such a swift assault, it was hard to feel a single motion acutely. It was more like a slow choking embrace, a stifling icy weight pressing in. I steadied my breathing, wanting to keep the discomfort in a holding pattern as long as possible. As the last of his trauma moved on to me, a distant smile softened the man's features. The tension in his muscles eased. He rolled over, careless and relaxed, enjoying the first moment of peace he'd experienced in a long while. But a moment was all I could give him. His lifetime of suffering sat like a block of ice on my chest. It moved in to clog my throat, and my thoughts grew fuzzy, and my breath fractured. I rode it out a few minutes more. After 3 nights of practice in a row, I had to do better. I needed to grow stronger. There was no use having ability I couldn't wield. Reaching my limit, I longed for a target, someone deserving of pain. Throwing it blindly out into the room would only leave the trauma free to crawl back inside him. I'm sorry, I thought, and drove his ghosts out with a swift, insistent push. The trauma left harder than I intended, blasting out with the force of a flashbang. A ring of misty black rippled through the room, striking and rattling the walls. Plaster crumbled, distant shouts of alarm echoed. The concussion knocked me to the floor, and the flashlight left my grip and rolled away, striping the shadowy room in rotating circles of yellow. As the light came to rest, aimed at the open doorway, I twisted to retrieve it. Blinking through the fading ache in my temple, it took me a moment to realise someone standing outside in the hall at the edge of the pale ray. The figure was masculine, well-built, and noticeably over my own height of 6 foot. There was nothing about him to indicate he wasn't human, but my instincts argued the point. I extended my senses, and his scent was obvious. Lyrican. But if he was one of my kind, why was he here? Was he tailing me? Our bodies metabolised the chemicals faster, but drugs and alcohol affected the shifters same as humans. If he was partaking or buying, this was a good place. except his posture was firm, his breathing steady. He wasn't using. "Hey!" I hollered, and he ran. Rolling over, I picked myself up, and by the time I reached the doorway he was gone, and something was burning. A screen tore down from one of the higher floors. The scent of cooking meat drifted out from the stairwell across the hall. I snatched up my flashlight, put away my scales, and took the steps 2 at a time. Traversing the obstacle course of empty bottles, fast food wrappers and beer cans, I followed the growing stench to the 4th floor. People were wandering the hall, leaving their darkened rooms and shuffling towards the only one emanating a light as bright as day. I shoved my way through the crowd. A few of the more clear-headed ones shoved back. Slamming a particularly aggressive man into the wall and tossing another aside, I ignored their shattered, slurred curses and moved to the front. I expected to find a vagrant too wasted to realise they'd fallen asleep with a cigarette. The woman standing alone and silent in a dank room brought me up to an abrupt halt. She wasn't a regular. Dressed for a night out in a miniskirt and sequined white top, she was someplace decent before deciding to take a detour to slumland. The sequin shimmered as each little circle caught the reflection of the flames consuming her legs. Each little circle caught the reflection of the flames consuming her legs. Nothing else was burning. But she didn't set the fire, she was the fire. Only traces of her makeup remained. Most had been lost to the weeping blisters on her face. Appearing an odd greenish hue, the swollen lumps weren't made from heat. Similar coloured, more solid-looking growths ran up the side of her neck and both forearms. Whatever the cause of her strange condition, it wasn't anything good. I turned to the crowd. They were mesmerised watching her burn. I shouted with authority, "Go!" When they didn't budge, I added, "I'm a cop," and the hallway emptied. Pivoting back to the woman, I brought scales out on my arms. Taking in extraneous fire wasn't a pleasant experience, but was all I could think to do to save her life. I lifted my hands as if copying the movement. She reached for me. Her fingers were swollen to twice their size. Marks stained the tops of her hands. I couldn't make out the imprints. A neon pink bracelet encircled her left wrist. The rubbery material was liquefying and adhering to her blackening skin. With an abrupt jump in temperature, flames swept up her torso. I had no time to relieve the woman of a single flickering tongue. Orange twinkled in the sequins for a breath before the fire ballooned into a dazzling inferno and her body turned to dust. I hope you enjoyed this chapter reading and that you'll go check out the book. Thanks very much for watching. Bye-bye.